Let's back up, and if you could describe what a week on Little House was like, what the production schedule was for an episode.
Oh my gosh. We shot an episode in, I think it was 6 or 7 days. And we generally, as a child, of course, I only worked 8 hours, but the adults only worked 10, maybe 12 maximum. And this is why everybody wanted to work with Michael Landon, because he sort of was like the Clint Eastwood of television, which is interesting because they kind of came up together at the same time with Burt Reynolds and that whole studio system at the same time. Michael would shoot. He knew what he wanted, and once he got it, that was it. There wasn't 12 takes, 40 takes, 30 takes. You know, maximum we did like 7. And he'd finish his day's work, and oftentimes, like, the executives from the network would be there, and he'd say it's a wrap, and the ADs would call a wrap, and everybody would be leaving at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the studio guys would go, well, aren't you going to keep shooting? And Michael would say, why? Why would I keep the crew working when I can send them home? They can spend the evenings with their families, do homework with their kids, and come back tomorrow refreshed. I made my page count. We'd shoot, 14, 15 pages, which is virtually unheard of now. Everybody knew exactly what they were doing. They had all worked together for years. Some of them from Bonanza, some from High Chaparral to Bonanza. And so there was this sort of shorthand that everybody just did everything. And then it was done. It was a really happy place. It was a great set to work on. And I'd say we'd be in the studio, which for the first 4 years was at Paramount and the last 6 at MGM, which is now Sony. So we'd shoot maybe 3 days of an episode inside and shoot 4 days outside at the ranch, at Big Sky Ranch in Simi Valley. And we had all of the sets out there. We had the town and the little house, and the outside was fun for me, except in summer. Summer was rough. And the only thing I remember about shooting that was particularly hard was we would shoot winter during the summer and summer during the winter. And I was either really hot or really cold. But all within reason, and I was always either bundled up or stripped down in between. And there was a lot of time to play. And I remember really clearly Richelieu Kelsey, who was our costume supervisor, pulling my dress up over my head. And so I'd just be in my petticoat and pantaloons and my boots, and I'd roll my stockings down so I could get cool. And then they'd pin my braids up on my head, and I'd be able to go play and do whatever I wanted and get as messy as I wanted. And there were horses, and I would ride, and I had my own horse, and I would constantly bug the stuntmen and wranglers to let me go riding, and they'd take me riding. And I caught frogs and played lots of card games and board games with the other kids and hide and seek. And we all, there were lots of rattlesnakes out there, though. So all the adults had shovels. And if someone saw a rattlesnake, we were taught to scream rattlesnake, and someone would come running over, and they'd just chop its head off. And many of us had rattlesnake hatbands for our cowboy hats, me included, that were from rattlesnakes that we killed out there. And then we had a game, Michael had a game that he and I played, where he would send me out to find the most disgusting thing that I could find. And I think the pièce de résistance was a mouse that had been run over. It was completely flattened. Because Michael liked to play tricks on people. It was completely flat, like a pancake, and dried out. So it was like dried flat mouse. And we had a script supervisor, a little tiny woman named Mary Yerke, who was, everything was in its place. And being a script supervisor is a tough job, keeping track of all that continuity and what's going on in every scene and all the dialogue. And then, what the editors need to know, she had all these pencils lined up, and she had everything, and her book was always perfect, and she had this little pop-up sort of camping seat that she had that had pockets in it, and she was this tiny little, very kind of nervous, almost mousy woman herself. And when she wasn't looking, she'd gone to the ladies' room. Michael, I brought him I picked up a flat, dried mouse. This is what a tomboy I was, and brought it to Mike. And Michael opened up her script to the scene we were doing and put the mouse in there. So she came back. She sat down. She would scoot in her chair and get really comfortable. she was just one of these kind of people. And she opened the book and screamed, and the whole book, the whole script went flying up in the air, and the binders opened, and there were pages everywhere, and the mouse went flying and landed on her head. She was screaming with the mouse, and he was on the floor. He was laughing so hard. I, of course, I couldn't catch my breath. You know that kind of laughter where you just stuck and no sound comes out? That's what happened to me. So that was more often, that was the tone of what we were doing. And then, like, instantaneously, he'd go, okay, let's get going. All right. So this is the scene. The dog has died. And all of a sudden, I'd be weeping over my dead dog. So it actually was quite a great lesson in facility, in being very facile as an actor, working with him.
That's cool. And in terms of the other people on the crew, did you work with the writers at all? Were you involved in the storylines, or?
I didn't have anything to say about where the show was headed, but I would always go in a few days before I knew the scripts were coming out to find out what was coming. And to, I definitely wanted to know what we were going to be doing next, what the storyline was next, were we going to have any fun guest stars coming in. So I was in the writer's room a lot, but I never really, I wasn't asked for suggestions, nor did I give any.
At what point in all of this did you realize that you had become famous and you were a celebrity?
I didn't really know. I remember riding in my mom's car with her and asking her, Mom, what is it like to be famous? And she looked at me, she went, you are. And I said, no, like famous, like Farrah Fawcett famous. And she said, Melissa, you are the #1 most recognizable female on television in the world. And I went, yeah, but that's not famous. I mean, like famous, like where people want to be you. And she went, that's who you are. And famous to me was Farrah, was famous. I think probably because I equated it with glamorous. So I didn't realize it. I didn't really feel pressured by it. It was in my teens and adolescence that it got to be a problem, because suddenly everything was so heightened and everyone wanted to know what was going on. My personal life, when I finally had one, was a very big deal. And that's when I realized, okay, and this is the dark side. I have no privacy. I have to behave a certain way in public. I have an image to protect. And I became aware of people recognizing me. I've become blissfully unaware again, although probably fewer and fewer are. But I did feel a lot of pressure in those years because, when you're an adolescent girl and you've got all those hormones and things going on, and people are doing things and experimenting with boys and experimenting with drugs, which I didn't do till much, much later. But there's a lot more freedom in that. And I felt that I couldn't be that way because too many young girls were looking up to me. And I felt responsible for their behavior as well, and for setting a good example.
And what were those fans like? Did they approach you?
There are different levels. I mean, because I think it's much different for people on television than it is for people who are in movies. Because in the movie theater, there's a big distance. There are these giant stars. They're almost unattainable and unreachable on a screen. You have to go somewhere to see them. But on television, when you come into someone's living room every week, there's a certain familiarity that they acquire. And then when you do a show like mine that really, like Little House on the Prairie was, that touches people in that way and that makes them think about family and love and community, they start to see you, or started to see me, as a relative or someone that they knew really well. So while there was that, aren't you Melissa? There was also, oh, come here, and a lot of grabbing and hugging and a lot of, people crying and telling me their stories, which now is great. I'm a grown-up woman, but, when I was little and in my, 9, 10, 11, 12, even up until 18, was just awkward because I don't know them. I don't think people realize that we can't see out of the television when we're in it. So we don't know whose room we're in. And that's where things get kind of scary sometimes. I mean, I didn't know at the time, but there were a lot of kidnap threats. There were a lot of people who wanted to, you know, steal me away to live with them. There was a lot of letters from prisons. Apparently, I was very popular in men's prisons as a child, which is, I'm glad I didn't know. I don't know who would tell a child this. But I did feel, you know, the people around me were hypervigilant. It didn't help. My grandfather used to tell my mom when we were babies, "Watch out, they're magic children. Someone will steal them." And he used to say that to us, "You stay close to your mom. Someone will steal you." So I was always kind of leery. And, you know, God bless my mother. When people would come up in droves asking for autographs, she'd say, "Oh, here come the senseless murderers." And you know, I think, oh my God, you know, which one of them is going to stab me now? So that part was scary. There were a couple times where I got literally mobbed and got my hair pulled out. That was not okay. That was terrifying. It was a really weird way to go through what should be a very private process growing up.
And how about your peers, kids who were your age? You played such a wholesome character on TV. When you were kind of becoming, you know, a teenager and doing teenager things, were people your age perceiving you as Laura Ingalls, or were they getting that you were different?
Well, the only way I can gauge it is by the kids that I went to school with when I went back to regular school, which wasn't all that often because I started doing movies pretty quick at about 13, 14, during our hiatus, which is when I would have gone back to school. But I remember in high school, you know, I always felt a little bit like an outcast because I had buck teeth and then I had all these braces. And, you know, when we were down, not filming, I had to have what I call super braces. So they'd put all the stuff on my teeth and a neck gear and rubber bands and all that stuff, and then they'd take it all off again after 3 months. And then I had rubber bands and things that I had to wear at night, a neck gear at night. But so I'd go to school feeling kind of alienated from people my own age and really only being able to relate, aside from Allison Arngrim, who was an adult at 2, kind of like me, being able to relate to adults much more easily. So I'd go back to school feeling like an alien, and then I had all the orthodonture on top of it, and I was a really good student. So that didn't really make, you know, that's not the right alchemy you need for popularity at any high school. I later found out, though, because I'm friends with a lot of people that I graduated with who knew me all through elementary school and high school, that a lot of the boys that I wished had asked me on dates actually didn't, because they thought I would be dating, you know, guys who had really fancy cars and were movie stars or TV stars, and why would I even say yes? And it was just a miscommunication. I remember saying to this one friend of mine, Dean, "Oh my God, I was so in love with you. You used to drive me home from school, and I never understood why you asked me out." And he said, "Because I was too intimidated." But I was a dork. I thought it was because I was geeky. No. So, you know, none of us talked about it. This was, you know, people didn't really talk much about feelings back then in the 70s. It was just sort of the beginning of the therapy movement where it was okay to start talking about what's on your mind.
Absolutely. Well, thank God for that. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about a few specific episodes. We've talked about some, but,
okay.
And just, you know, whatever you remember, if anything, it doesn't have to. The Lord is My Shepherd. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah. I remember The Lord is My Shepherd very clearly because it's my favorite episode. And for so many reasons. On an off-camera personal level, we went back up north to Sonora, California to shoot it. So we were back on location, and I was the only kid that got to go. So I was feeling pretty special. And Ernie Borgnine was the guest star. And he could not have been warmer or nicer, and he just fit right in. And Victor French was there, who was always such a joy to be with, and so great with us kids, and so funny and kind. And then there was Mike. So, you know, there I was in the midst of all of these incredible men. Right at the time, you know, my parents had split up years before, so I wasn't spending as much time with my dad as I'd wanted because he was on the road. So I had all these dad figures around me, especially Mike. And it was it was just great. And the story itself was a really beautifully, beautifully written two-part. It's our first one, too. It was our first two-part episode that Michael wrote. And he wrote it for me. And then at the end of the episode, where he and I are reunited after I run away from home because my baby brothers died and I refused to pray for him when he was sick, and so I run away to find God to ask him to take me and give my father back his son. And then Michael finds me, or Pa finds me. There's the scene at the top of the mountain where the two of us come together, and you can hear in my voice, even though it's over my shoulder for part of it, and for the moment we embrace, but Michael was just beside himself, and I could barely talk. I couldn't catch my breath. I was crying so hard, and it's so real, and it was the quintessential illustration of that symbiotic thing that he and I had, where we could just set each other off. And I think it's because he really understood each other and knew each other and really loved each other. And at that moment, you could see how much that man and this little girl loved him, and he loved her.
That's beautiful. What about Laura Ingalls Wilder, that episode? Do you feel like there was kind of an enormity to the wedding? That it was one of those.
It was really scary. Laura Ingalls Wilder was a really scary episode for me to, be getting married, and I was, I think, maybe on my way to 17 at the time, and so, I had just started dating, maybe gotten my first kiss, but to me at that age, when you're that age and you're a young girl and you think getting married means having sex and having babies, and I was pretty far away from all of those concepts. So, and Dean Butler, bless his heart, who's a dear friend to this day, was considerably older. He was a man. I wrote in my book, he shaved his face. I wasn't even allowed to shave my legs yet. That's how, when we first met on the show. So we sort of had this relationship established, and now we're going to be doing scenes in bed together. I mean, not, sex scenes, but eating popcorn and reading the Bible, but still, that means that we sleep together. There was a lot of responsibility there. Not to mention, this was, historically, for the literary world, an iconic moment when Laura Ingalls married Almanzo Wilder and became Laura Ingalls Wilder. So there was a lot of, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I was afraid, because, I was still very much a little girl, and now I was having to be this woman-ish. It was very unsteady times for me.
Are there any other episodes that come to mind for you that you want to talk about? We'll talk a little bit more about the kind of final episode in a minute.
No, not that jump out at me. I haven't watched it in so long because I took my name off the TiVo.
Did you used to watch yourself then?
We used to watch every Monday night. The family would get together every Monday night, and it was Little House on the Prairie. First we were on Wednesdays, and then The Bionic Woman started on ABC, I think it was, and kicked our butt. So they moved us to Monday nights at 8 o'clock. But yeah, we'd sit down, just like all the other families that watched it, and sit and watch Little House on the Prairie. And what was really kind of interesting was I would sit and watch it, and I knew what was coming. I knew what I'd done. I knew that was me. I knew I'd read the script, and I'd get completely caught up in it. And I'd watch just like anybody else, going, oh, poor Laura, look how sad she is. And sometimes I'd stop and go, hello, that's me. But I didn't sit there and watch it critically. I didn't watch to see what I could do differently. I would just get completely entranced in the story.
Awesome. How did you find out the show was canceled?
Ugh. I found out the show was canceled when Victor French called me out of the blue and said, I'm going to go do, I think it was Dinah Shore. I'm going to go on Dinah Shore, and I'm going to protest the cancellation. Do you want to come with me? And I went, protest the cancellation of what? To come with, what, where? And he said, the show is canceled. And I said, canceled? He said, yeah, it's not on the fall lineup. And I think I screamed and I ran to my mom. And of course, honestly, at this point, I was ready for it to end, because I was ready to sort of get on with my life. It wasn't a career decision. I just, I was dating then. I was in love with somebody. I was starting to travel with a whole different crowd of friends. I wanted the freedom to do things. I wanted to be able to cut my hair however I wanted to. I wanted to be able to, you know, act out and do crazy things and fly to New York for the weekend and drink champagne and, you know, be an adolescent girl. I didn't want to wear lace-up boots. At that point, they were lace-up, not button-hook, and petticoats anymore. And then they told me I couldn't, and then I wanted to. I remember calling my manager, who then called Michael Landon, and he called me back and he said, you know, the network never even called Michael. They just, you're not on the fall schedule, that's it. And I guess Michael was furious and wanted to, you know, tear everything down, and my manager called and said, wait. See if we can milk this. And that's where the final three movies came from, ending with the final episode. But the final three movies were the one where Albert came home with cancer. This was the non-existent morphine-addicted brother previously. And there was a horrendously bad Christmas episode where our daughter Rose was kidnapped by a crazy lady whose daughter had died. And then there was the final episode. The Last Farewell, I think it's called.
Talk a little bit about that. What happens at the end of that episode?
At the end, well, the beginning of the episode, a land baron comes in on his railroad car, his own entire car on the train, and lets us know that he owns the deed to the land of Walnut Grove, but that we can stay there and continue to work in our businesses. He just owns everything, and we owe him all the money. So in one scene, I guess, it was one scene I get mad and I start breaking windows in my boarding house, which Laura Ingalls-Wilder never really had. I start breaking windows in my boarding house, and then in the church meeting with the whole town, I get up and say, you know what? I broke a few windows. I don't care, but they were my windows. I know it sounds silly. They're my windows, and he's not going to get my windows. And then someone else has the idea and says, I've got an entire wagon load of dynamite. Let's just blow the whole thing up. And we do. And Michael had come back with Karen Grassley for that episode. Ma and Pa were visiting when this whole thing went down. And so they blew everything up. And it was Michael's way of saying, you know, no one else is going to shoot here. This was mine, you know. You may own these windows, but they're my windows, and now you're not going to get them. And the day before we shot the final scene where we blow everything up, they came in and actually, the crew and Michael, and did the special effects of literally blowing up these buildings. And it was extraordinary when we came in the next day to shoot our reactions, and then the final scene of walking through the rubble singing Onward Christian Soldiers, which is so Little House on the Prairie and fantastic. We all walked down into town from the trailers together and rounded the corner, and it was gone. And, you know, there were all of these buildings. Everything blew up but the little house. There were all of these buildings that, you know, we'd had all of these experiences that I grew up in and around. I laid inside on hot days if I had a cold with a fan on me. I got my first kiss behind the church. For real, in real life. I got stung by a bee. There was just so many things that happened there. I learned how to ride a horse, for real, not just in circles. And it was just gone. And it was crushingly sad. It was just crushing for all of us. And the crew included. And we all just kept, you know, going all day, and someone would start to cry, and then everybody else would start to cry, and then we'd all stop, and then we'd all hold each other, and then we'd start again. And we had steak and lobster for lunch, and then it was over, and time to go home. And it was great because we really had a chance to say goodbye. I'm very big on saying goodbye and closure. There was no question that this would never happen again, and that it was time to move on. And it was scary and it was sad, but it was also very freeing. And I remember the very end of the day, I went back just to look one more time before I left, and Michael was standing in the middle by himself of all of this rubble. And I walked over to him, and he put his arm around me, and he was crying, and I started crying. And I said to him, you know, I'm scared. And he said, don't be scared. He said, for you, this is just the beginning. And we walked away back to the cars and trailers together, and arm in arm. And at that moment, I didn't feel any better, but he was right. It really was just the beginning.
Yeah. What do you feel the legacy of the show is?
I think, you know, it's hard to... It's hard to say what... When I hear the word legacy, I think of something that was left behind. And it's really hard to think of something that's left behind because the show lives on television all over the world. And there are generations of kids who are watching it all over again, or watching it for the first time now. And and the stories are beginning for them again. And then it's the TV show's getting these children to read the books, or vice versa. And they're discovering it generation after generation after generation. So the legacy lives on in that it's still there, and it still has that same meaning. And here we are again now in the worst recession our country has ever seen. And I just came back from taking Little House on the Prairie out on tour as a musical, and it was immensely successful, and all for the exact same reasons, because people need to remember that if we could do that then, we can do this now. And it's supremely entertaining without dumbing down, I think. I think it's one of the few shows families can sit together and watch and everybody gets something out of it. And it's just beautiful aesthetically to look at the skies out there in Simi where we shot. And it reminds us of actually what Laura Ingalls Wilder said, it's the sweet, simple things in life that are best. And I think Little House on the Prairie, the television series, is one of those sweet, simple things. It's the ultimate TV comfort food. You know, when you don't feel well and you're home in your jammies and you turn on the TV, that's what you want to watch.
Definitely. Unfortunately, Michael Lennon passed away before the archive was able to interview him. And legacy, again, is maybe the wrong word here, but what impact do you think was his impact on the industry?
Michael Landon was on television for 35 years, all told, between Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, Highway to Heaven. Yeah, 35 years or so. He knew, he had this incredible inherent knowledge of what moved people and what touched them. And I think what that was basically is what we all aspire to be. And I think it's because that's what he aspired to be. You know, I would love for him to come walking into this room, but he could walk into the room and go, bullshit, half pint. But I think that is a tremendous gift that he had, of something that he was maybe missing, that he craved. And he tapped into that in all of us, that we all want to be better people. We all want to contribute more to society. We don't want to live isolated. We want to feel like we're part of a community. And he really conveyed that through his work. And it was tremendously recognized by people all over the world, and still is, and was never recognized by the business, which is extraordinary for someone to have been that influential on that many people for that many years, to have never been nominated for, to win an award, or an Emmy specifically, is kind of contradictory in a lot of ways. Because, you know, as far as the people went, it was, you know, Michael couldn't get enough kudos. And I think he was greatly underestimated by the industry and greatly revered by the public who watched him. And I don't think the industry realized how important he was until he left, until he passed away. And really, there's nothing like anything he ever did on television now. And it's something people want and crave and ask me about all the time. Why don't you produce something like that? And I laugh and say, no, you couldn't sell that to a network executive today. They'd look at you and go, yeah, but do they drive fast cars? You know, it wouldn't happen, although there is a need for it. So I don't know. He was a visionary. He was smart. He was funny, and he was a perfectionist. And he knew what he wanted and exactly how to get it. And he knew what the people wanted. That's really rare. That's really rare. There's not a lot of people. There are none that I can think of like him.
Did you stay in touch with him after the series ended?
We lost touch with one another actually after he left the show, pretty much. I mean, I'd see him when he'd come in to work every once in a while as producer or writer or guest star in an episode. But our social connection had definitely severed at that point. But we reconnected at his daughter Leslie's wedding, and we're actually making plans to get together. They went on he and his wife Cindy and the little kids went on a ski trip, and we kept putting it off. And then I had, you know, baby Dakota, and there was stuff going on with me, and we finally were going to get together, and it was right before he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And then it just all happened so fast. So no, we didn't see or talk to each other as often as we could have, but we did have a really significant and important time together. What turned out to be exactly a week before he died, I went out to see him. And we spent the day out there, and he and I had some time to be alone, which was very important for both of us, and gave us a chance to say a lot of things that we hadn't ever really said to each other. And it was really hard. And it was really hard to see him so frail and sick. Because to me, he was this gigantic, muscly, he always was. But he was really, really sick, and I could tell that that he was done. You know, he suffered a lot. With a very brave face. I mean, going on the Tonight Show while going through treatment for pancreatic cancer and doing the one-handed push-up, and that's who he was. So seeing him, you know, unable to get up off the couch was hard, but I'm really glad I did it. I almost chickened out at the last minute. And then I thought, no, you better go do this. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I did. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him, especially when I'm working. And I'm lucky enough to have had the chance to name one of my sons after him, so I hear his name every day.
That's great. That's pretty much all of our Little House questions. The only other person that we wanted to ask about is Kent McRae.
Oh my God. Kent McRae is an amazing man. I just had dinner with he and his wife Susan not a few months ago. He and Michael were like brothers, thick as thieves, best friends, and they worked together so well. And Kent was one of those producers who, really a rare commodity too. He and Michael together were willing to give people a chance because they believed in them. And if the people came through, they were greatly rewarded. And they were smart businessmen. And Kent was, I don't know, they're both equally as silly. Also an absolute prankster. Very funny, very smart man with a long and storied history in television. I could not have been in better hands. I mean, if you have to put a child on a television show, which I would not recommend, I think I got the best possible scenario, working with Kent and Michael and Victor and working on that show that was kid-friendly. They were very strict about my grades. They were very concerned about school. I do remember one day when Kent was there, I was in high school and I had to dissect a frog, and they sent me a frog from school to dissect. And I was in this, I had this little pop-up schoolroom on the stage, on the sound stage at MGM, and work stopped. The entire crew and Michael and Kent were in the pop-up schoolroom over my shoulder while I was dissecting the frog, going, "Oh, what's that? Half Pint, what's that?" Until finally someone said, "I think we're supposed to be filming something." That was a fun day. So, you know, Kent McRae was also very visionary that way, and I think he supported Michael's vision 100% and knew exactly what the people wanted and knew how to do it within the confines of the budget and to treat his crew with so much respect, down to, you know, craft service and the greensmen and the prop masters, and it was a real family environment, and Kent definitely set that tone. He and Michael were the two big guys. We played ping pong. We had a ping pong table and everybody had teams, and they were the Jew and the Giant. Because Kent is he's tall and big, and Michael was, you know, his name is actually Eugene Orowitz. So they were the Jew and the Giant.
That's awesome. So let's talk about a few other projects during the Little House years. Did you do a lot of talk shows as a kid, and do you have any memories of being on those talk shows?
I did a lot of talk shows. Specifically, I mean, I remember doing all of them. I remember David Steinberg, and I remember David Letterman, and, you know, I remember doing them, but I remember especially doing an episode of Fernwood Tonight, which was a spoof of a talk show. And I was playing myself. And the studio got taken over by terrorists while I was a guest on their show, was the premise. And I remember doing that because it was funny. And I hadn't had a chance. I mean, I had the, you know, occasional funny moments on Little House on the Prairie, certainly. You know, the Halloween Dreams and Pa with green hair and stuff like that. But this was a chance to just actually do, you know, sketch comedy. And I remember having just a great time with Howard Hessman and Fred Willard. Fred Willard, oh, funny. Well, they're both brilliantly funny, and that show was funny. And doing the fake interview, and then it was great fun. I did Dinah. I hosted Mike Douglas for a week, and Michael Landon came on and surprised me. I did all of those talk shows.
That's cool. And what about Hollywood Squares?
Oh gosh, Hollywood Squares was great fun for me. I did that show a lot. I think I might have been one of the only kids that they kept having back. I'm not sure. And I loved, because I'm really kind of, and I've always been sort of a twisted person, I had lunch, every time I did that show, I would sit and have dinner, actually, with Paul Lynde, who I thought was fantastic. And he had these two huge standard poodles named Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine. I did not know who Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine were. I know who Margot Fontaine was, but I figured there were some fancy people because he named his poodles after them. But he would tell me the most horribly dirty jokes. And I can't imitate his laugh, but he would laugh and it would just make me giggle. I just loved doing that show. I had a lot of fun. And Peter Marshall was a family friend.
And what about being on it again later? Because you were on the later version of it,
too,
the
Whoopi
right?
version. Yeah, it was weird being back. It was weird being back in a square with a whole new, you know, group of people, and not having Paul in there and have Whoopi there instead. And I think Tom Bergeron was the host, who's been a friend of mine for years. It was fun. It was different going back as an adult because the illusion was blown. As a child, I was still sort of fascinated by it all, even though I knew how to get into the square from the back, and it wasn't that big a deal. It still felt very bright and shiny, and Paul Lynde was so much larger than life, and George Gobel was funny. They were just funny, and the humor then was a little more, I mean, it was just as dirty and double entendre, but it was just held back a little bit. Like, the things were slightly more inferred, which made us use our imaginations more, which made it that much funnier. This was the days of Love American Style. And then, you know, going back, it was just plain raunchy, which is funny in its own way. But I just remember, oh God, and the women wore Bob Mackie stuff and they had sequins on. It was fun. That was fun in the 70s.
It must have been. Was Battle of the Network Stars fun?
Battle of the Network Stars was great because I was always the youngest. So I was the fastest, the most nimble. And, you know, I flat-chested and I just, you know, raced through everything. There were all these women with their curves and stuff. I hope they never bring that back. Well, I don't have a TV show on the air right now, but I couldn't do it now. There's no way. But it's a brilliant idea. You get a bunch of actors who are currently on television and make them compete against each other in athletic competition. There were sprained ankles, there were broken bones, people were passing out. They were killing themselves to beat each other. And it was always over the course of 2 days. So the first day everyone would push really hard, and then the second day all the adults would be, you know, there'd be ice packs everywhere and they'd be moaning, going, I need aspirin. This was before Advil. I need aspirin. And I'd just be looking at them going, what? Ugh, okay, whatever. I was a child. That was fun. That was fun for me. And I got a tracksuit with my name on the back, which is pretty cool, and a peacock on the front.
Do you remember any of the people you competed against?
Penny Peyser was an actress that I competed against who, in an odd way, is a part of my personal universe at this point, kicked her butt. And let's see, who else? There was someone else, some other grown-up. And I just remember breezing through, there was that obstacle course, breezing through the obstacle course. Oh, but more than who I competed against, my coaches. Bob Conrad was my coach a couple times. He was serious about the competition. Again, brilliant. Actors competing athletically, hello. He wanted me to compete in the kayak. So he sent a kayak to my house with an instructor, and I learned how to kayak in my pool. And I had to practice before we did the show. And I must say, I kicked butt in the kayak.
That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
In 1982, you were selected as a spokesperson for the Action Drug Prevention Program. Mm-hmm. How did that come about, and what was that experience like? I'm
not really sure how that whole thing came about, but it had something to do with, that was the, it was a subsidiary or somehow aligned with the Just Say No campaign. It was right at the same time as Nancy Reagan was launching the Just Say No campaign. And so the two worked in tandem, and Nancy Reagan, who was First Lady at the time, and I, obviously, traveled together a couple different places and spoke about drugs and their effect on young people, and her message was just say no. My message was, this is going to mess you up so badly, because they brought in all of these scientists that heretofore, you know, that had never really had a voice, who told me, not lectured me, but told me all about, showed me all of the empirical evidence about the, you know, the dangers of THC in the body and what cocaine can do and hallucinogens. And I didn't know from this, you know, all I knew was the movies we were shown in school in the 70s, which were all made in the 60s, and, you know, were about hopheads and like the occasional person who dropped LSD and thought they could fly and jump off a building, which is so, at that time, seemed so random. It certainly wasn't going to be me. It was a much less realistic conversation. So when they brought in all these doctors and they talked to me about all of this scientific evidence about what drugs could do, they scared the crap out of me. Not for long, but they scared the crap out of me. And I felt that, you know, I could do this. I should do this. It didn't really help with my geeky image much, but whatever. I felt a certain responsibility. You know, here I could take this image that I had and do something good with it. Do something that you know, might help save someone's life even. So, and when the doctors came in and scientists and started telling me, you know, medical stuff, I was in heaven because it was medicine. So there were some incredible opportunities, speaking in front of groups of tens of thousands of future farmers of America, and going to the White House and meeting Mrs. Reagan, and traveling a bit. It was a very interesting time for me.
I can imagine. We want to talk a bit, focus in on the Half Pint productions.
Sure.
So, you're on Little House and you started this production company. At that time, did you feel like you were being typecast as Laura Ingalls?
What's interesting is you make, and people assume that they make this assumption that at 14 I went, I think this is going to limit my possibilities as an actor, and I'm going to create a production company and make my own films, which is not exactly how it went. It was my mother and my then manager, Raymond Katz, who, my mother took me in to meet him, and he said to me, what do you want to do? What are your dream roles? We want to make this thing. I didn't think it was going to be for longevity of career, but, I was 14 years old. I just thought it'd be a chance for me to play other interesting roles. And so one of the first things that my mom and I both said was that, well, The Miracle Worker, and would be great. It would be great to play Helen Keller. And he said, okay, let's see what we can get that done. And the next thing I knew, we had a production in place, and I had a production company, Half Pint Productions, and I was meeting with Patty Duke, and I was playing Helen Keller, and we were doing it first as a play, and I'd never been on stage before, and then as a movie of the week. And it was an extraordinarily terrifying time because partway through, towards the end of rehearsals here in LA before we went to Florida to do it as a play, my mother was very frank with me. The director and producers pulled her aside and said, she's not getting it. She's just walking through. And so my mom came and talked to me, and we agreed that I would go see Jeff Corey again. And so we made the trek out to Malibu, to Hippie Jeff's place. And I had another sore throat, so he gave me more acidophilus to drink. And then he took me out to his workshop, and we talked about the role for a little bit. And we talked about what it would be like to not be able to see and not be able to hear. And that was a place my imagination just wasn't taking me. And so Jeff said, you have to trust me. This is going to be scary, but you have to trust me. And I was like, fine, whatever, I'm not scared. And he blacked out the windows, blindfolded me, put earplugs in my ears, turned out the lights, and basically just threw me and pushed me around the room and moved furniture for about 3 hours. And deprived me of all of my senses except for touch. And I developed this, and kept, every once in a while I stop and say, remember this feeling, remember this feeling, remember this feeling. And that's when I sort of discovered the way the character moved and walked, and how, when I was there, in that situation, I realized that leaving where I was to go someplace was really scary because I didn't know what was ahead. I only knew what was behind. So if you see the movie, you see that I've always got one hand back and one hand forward. It just sort of blossomed from there. And then I was working with Patty Duke, who had played Helen Keller, but we weren't allowed to discuss it at all, except she finally had it. We were on the plane flight to Florida, and I tapped her on the shoulder. I was in the seat behind her, and I said, I'm having a little trouble, and I just had this session with Jeff Corey, and I know I'm not supposed to talk to you. And she went, oh, thank God, thank God. And so we had this sort of very involved, because she knew, she'd met Helen Keller and had spent time with her and communicated with her and heard her voice. And we talked about the whole thing. And I was able to go, even deeper in developing this character, and it was really freeing. My makeup backstage was a peppermint candy. I would eat peppermint candy, and then I would get my hands really sticky, and I would rub the peppermint candy on my face because we were responsible for our own makeup. And then I had dirt, and I would get the dirt and put dirt on my face, and that was my makeup. And I was terrified opening night because I'd never done a play, but. So, if it's scary, I'm going to do it. And I remember they had an entrance for me where I would enter from the center upstage and then run straight down. Someone said, where's Helen? Oh, here's Helen now. Perfect. Cue. And I'd run straight down stage and then stop. And the first night, opening night, at the Royal Poinciana Playhouse in Palm Beach, Florida, where's Helen? Here's Helen now. And I came running downstage and I stopped, and 2 rows stood up to catch me. And I knew. They think I'm blind. They think I'm her. and the rest was just, it was like flying. And to feel the audience's reactions and to hear them and hear their concern. And I was wild and unbridled on stage, throwing myself at things. I was covered in bruises. I looked like a Dalmatian. But it didn't matter because I had them. We extended for 2 weeks. So by the time we got to the movie, I knew exactly what I was doing. And I remember when they were decorating the set, and I came in and I said, can I add something? You know, I don't generally talk to anybody in any of their departments, but can I add something? Can we dirty up my hands? I think all the walls should have a consistent smudge where my hands have been everywhere. So if you look at the movie, there's like the hand smudge down all of the staircases, and you know, it's everywhere, because I wanted to be able to continually touch where I was going to, where I was leaving from to get to where I was going. And it was a collaborative effort like that when we shot the movie together. And it was just one of those things that went off without a hitch. And Patty Duke, I was bigger than her when we did it. And mighty, that woman could pick me up and throw me across the stage or throw me across the set if she needed to. The hardest thing for me in the movie was taking a picture of water straight on in my face without blinking. That we had to do that a few times. But we finally did it, and I slightly blinked, but they just printed it because it was like torture, just sitting and seeing this pitcher full of water coming at you and trying not to close your eyes is really hard. But all of that technical stuff is just not there. It's just, and it was magical to shoot it, and then they took it and they cut it together, and then they put that music to it. And we went to the screening of it, and I remember Michael Landon coming too, and I was wrecked. Again, because I'm watching this, and even though I put this much work into it, I'm still watching this thing completely wrapped up in the story and the film, and it was extraordinary. It was a perfect movie. And then they told us IBM was going to sponsor it, so it had one commercial break in the middle, which is today absolutely unheard of. Then was pretty rare. And it just grew and blossomed, and the movie aired, and it was hugely successful. And then the Emmy nominations came out, and it was just, that was ridiculous.
We'll talk about that. So
yeah,
how did you find out, and what was your reaction?
I think it was my mother that answered the phone and screamed, "Oh my God, you're nominated for an Emmy." And I screamed. I was in the kitchen, and I screamed, and I thought, "Oh my God, you know, this is amazing. It's so exciting." And then she went, "What?" She was on the phone still. "You're kidding. What?" And she looked at me and she said, "Anna," which is Patty Duke's real name, "is nominated, same category." And I went, "Yes, she's going to win." And then she said, "And Betty Davis." And I went, "Wait, who?" "And Lee Remick." "Wait, no, I can't win. Please, Mom, please. That's embarrassing. I can't win. I don't want to win. Please, I can't win." And she kept saying, "Well, if you win, you win." "No, I'm not going to go. I won't walk up there. I can't. It's humiliating. I'm 14. No, I'm not doing it. I'm not going." Turned out I couldn't go anyway because SAG was on strike and they boycotted the Emmys that year. So that was the one and only year I was nominated, and I couldn't go. But Patty Duke did win. And I was sitting at home. This is so sad. This is like pathetic. In my gown, watching my Emmy gown, watching the Emmys. But then the film won Best Picture that year. So technically, I won as an executive producer when I was 14. But, you know, I wasn't really that involved with producing it. I got more involved with my production company later, with later productions, but not that one.
Well, that was one of our questions, is how involved were you? When you became more involved, what did you do? What role did you take on?
I had a lot of say in casting, and in the hiring of directors, and rewriting of scripts, and just getting involved on a very creative level like that. But it wasn't, like I said, until much later in my late teens and then early to mid-20s was when all of that sort of started, when I started to feel like, you know, I had a voice. Because up until that point, I didn't really think that I had much of a say. people saw me as a child. I definitely saw me as a child. So I didn't think that I was allowed to. I didn't realize that it was named after me, you know. But that was how it was.
And did your mother have an official role in the company, and did she have an official role in your career?
My mother is the co-owner of Half Pint Productions. No, she did not have an official title in my career. I had a manager, a business manager, a publicist or two, and then the network publicists. And I was my own little franchise, actually, my own little enterprise, which was the name of my company, Half Pint Enterprises, still is my corporation. But the production company, Half Pint Productions, my mother and I co-owned. President and co-president, I think, is our official titles.
So the next Half Pint production was Diary of Anne Frank.
Yes.
In 1980. So were you familiar with the story, and had you read the book?
Very familiar with the story, very familiar with the book. Again, like Helen Keller and Laura Ingalls Wilder, I had studied Anne Frank in school, so I knew who she was. I was roughly around the same age, 15. I turned 16 while we were shooting. I turned 15 while we were shooting The Miracle Worker. I know this because we do this in the summer when we're on hiatus. Diary of Anne Frank was a completely different animal, though. There was one set, one room. It was much darker. The story was much more challenging in a lot of ways to film and make interesting. The cast was stellar, stellar. Maximilian Schell, Joan Plowright, Doris Roberts, James Coco, Scott Jacoby, and let's see, who else was in it? Clive Revel. And it was directed by Boris Sagal, who was the mother of Katie, actually, or the father of Katie. And Boris was notorious for having a bad temper, and did he ever. But those actors, to work with them it was like a master class, just watching them all. There were some moments where I felt that I was definitely in over my head, but, you know, I'd seen the previous version, the sort of Disney version with Millie Perkins, and it was too pretty. It was too glossed over. So I thought we definitely brought a much more gritty realism to it. Maximilian Schell intimidated the hell out of me. He flirted with me a little too much, you know, and I was 15, and that wasn't okay. But Joan Plowright was amazing and warm and funny, and I had no idea who her husband was until one day he came on the set and everyone was saying, Larry, 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 how are you, how are you? And, you know, going over to kiss his ring, essentially. And I turned around, it was Laurence Olivier. I don't know what planet I was living on. Her son, Dickie Olivier, was working on the film with us. I didn't do the math. And he stayed and watched us work. It was a little bit scary for me.
We need to
change.
break and change.